So here's the second part of our skin weights, right? This is after we've done a little bit of painting. I maybe used my Delta mush to get some things figured out. And I want to go ahead and take a moment to focus on the head, the eyes, and the jaw. So we're going to use a couple of different tactics to help us get the eyes sort of figured out. Mostly going to be using some of the component editors like we've done before, as well as use some selection tools and some different, some different tactics based off of what we already know to get things skinned up. So to begin with the eyes, right, something you might want to do is parent the actual eyeballs to the eye bones if you want to get things sort of set up. I personally am not super duper fond of that method, so I might just skin up my eyeballs to the eye bones right now just so I can be done with it. So I'll grab my LT girl eyes, shift select my bone, I'll go up to skin, bind skin, and I know we've reduced the influences, but I might turn this on and noodle around by increasing that to see if that might have helped some of the issues I was having in class. So let's see here. Why do we have an error? It's already connected to a skin cluster. Let's go ahead and skin, unbind that. Unbind. Same with the right eye, unbind. And just to double check, right, we might have unbound some things, but even though the skeleton has lost its color, it's still mostly skinned up, right, with the exception of the eyeballs. So don't be too worried about that. The rainbow color of the skeleton is purely visual. So that said, let's try this again. I'll use skin, bind, skin. Same for the right eye. Skin, bind, skin. Let's see here. So yeah, it looks like we're getting those to work. Again, do note that to fix that, I increase the max influences, and you can use that to help. We did also try using the interactive bind tool, right? So we would grab this eye, shift selected the eye, and use skin, interactive bind skin, and just not touch anything after you hit that button. But there are multiple ways to go about getting the eyes down. That said, I'll go ahead and solo out this eye and set the vertex weights, not paint weights, and set the vertex weights all to be on LTI just so they move with it. So I'll go ahead and minimize those for now, but I just went to vertex selection mode, double clicked on any vertex to grab everything, and I'll go up to Windows, down to General Editors, into our trusty component editor. Now you see I have a lot of different influences from everything else, right? And I just want the eye to work on this. So we'll do what we've done before, but instead of keying in 0, we'll key in 1 for just the LTI. So we'll grab the first box, scroll down to the bottom, shift click and grab the last box. Instead of typing in 0, right, I'll just type in 1 and hit enter. Now everything else except for LTI has been removed, and only these vertices are under the influence of just this one bone. So I'll go back to object mode, unsolo, and now see that everything is going according to plan. I'll repeat that same process for the right eye. Solo it out first, change the vertex selection and just double click on the same vertex. And now this time I'll apply that to RTI. So I'll grab the topmost vertex rather, go down to the bottom, shift select, hit 1 on my keyboard to get all those weights set up. And now those eyes are skinned up. So something you also might have noticed is that, my eyes aren't moving the other parts of my, like my eyelids. We went over this in class, right? But by default, if these eye bones aren't moving your eyelids, and this probably isn't happening because I did the skin weights thing where I reduced my influences to 1, I can also add influences back in by using the add influence command. So again, if your eyelid isn't moving along with the actual eyeball, which we'll get into fixing in a little bit, we can go ahead and add these bones in to influence the mesh and paint on top of them or use our component editor to fix them. So I'll shift select my other bone, right? Then I'll grab my mesh next, and I'll go up to skin, down to edit influence, and then add influence. All right, so if you delta mushed like me and you needed to add influences back in, it may throw in that error, which is a good thing. So we can just sort of paint on those influences and fix them with our component editor. So it's a little bit different from how we went around it in class, but the idea is going to be the same. So if you have influence here in your eye sockets on this geometry, you don't necessarily have to use this part, but this may be useful in the future as well. I'll hide my joints, and I just want to paint on some influence for the LTI and the RTI, like right in here in the eye socket. So I'm going to grab my paint weights, double click, and start smooshing stuff down until I can get to my eyes. And I'm already here. So I'll just go in and add a little bit. And I might hide my actual eyeballs, H. So I do need to get in here, right, and paint up some of that influence. So by adding influences and painting, those weights back on, one, we're not only getting our eyelid to move with it, but we're also sort of bringing those numbers back into our component editor. Because if they're missing, you might have difficulties. And then, if I'm fine with that and I just need to bring it back, I can go up to skin, over to mirror skin weights. Now if I double check and look at my RTI instead, push that down, I'll have something similar set up here. So now that I have those values actually available to access in my component editors, I'll bring back my eyes and take a look and see how moving those joints distorts the face. That's actually not too bad. Some refining required, right? But yeah, that's getting a little weird up in there. So we might have to make some adjustments, but not a bad first pass. But just to make sure, we have everything, squared away, we dot our I's and cross our T's. I'm going to show you that selection trick that we used in class to make sure that the eyes aren't touching anything else. So first I'll hide the actual geometry for the eyeballs, right? Maybe even unsmooth them first. Hit H. We'll dive into the vast void of her eyes. So we have a little bit of geometry here, right? So I'll right click, go to either vertex selection mode, and what I can do is I can grab one vertex, hold down shift, and double click its neighbor to select in a ring, or I can just go to edge mode and double click an edge, and it will grab the entire loop for me. If I hold down shift and do that to keep going on our way out, I can even use, shift period to grow my selection a little bit to right around here. And actually, before I do that, I forgot to turn on symmetry, so let's do that next. I'll go over to my modeling toolkit and change my symmetry to Object X so I can grab both sides and work on that influencing that I was talking about. You can also hold down Control, Shift, and then hold down right click to go up to symmetry and turn on symmetry for Object X. But any way you want to do that is fine. There's also a menu up here. But now I'm going to go ahead and grab those edges, start growing my selection with the shift period. Now I have it on both sides. So I'm going to hit Control F9 to convert the selection to vertices, right? If you started with vertices to begin with, that's okay. You could have also selected a ring of vertices and grown your selection that way. Now I'll hop back into the component editor after we do one last thing, which is invert our selection. So the way this works, right, is now I have everything that I want to be moved by the eyes selected. And now I want to basically invert this and use the component editor to take off the eyes from everything else, right? So everything else but what we have selected. So I'll go up to the select menu. I'll go down to inverse, which, if you're hotkey savvy, also works as Control Shift I. Now I have literally everything else on the body that is not LTI and RTI, or that we don't want LTI and RTI to affect. So with that selection, I'll hop back into my component editor, and we can see there's some LTI in this column, right? So I'll go ahead and grab the first option, or the first data bank, scroll down to the bottom, hold down Shift, the last one, because we see there's some values in here, right? And I'll hit 0 and hit Enter. So now it'll vanish. So this should be pretty familiar, right? I'm going to go forward and look for RTI. It looks like there is some influence in here. So the size of your influence may be much larger depending on how you have your skeleton bound. So like, in class, this might have been impacting the actual side of her head and her ears when we were moving the eyes. But either way, these values are still here when we don't want them to be. So I'll grab the first option, scroll down to the bottom, hold down Shift, zero it out, and boom. Now the eyes for sure are not going to be messing with anything else. I'll switch back to object mode, and now I can go into paint weights or manually key in some, vertex weights ourselves, and I'll turn off symmetry before I do so. Maybe bring back my LTI and make my joints visible. And now we'll see what happens if we rotate these. So now we're getting some distortion with the eyeball, right? That's actually not too bad. I'm starting to think that this ring in here is a bit much. So what I'll do is I'll go back to my vertex selection mode. I have my old selection here, right? Maybe I want to click on this one, this particular vertex in this ring, hold down shift and grab its neighbor. Go back to the component editor. And there are some RTI influences, which isn't ideal, so I can zero those out. And again, I'm having us work on the left side so we can just mirror these over to the right side. But LTI has a little too much weight here, right? Like maybe I want to do something much more subtle than like 0.45 or even 0.5, like that's extreme. So maybe if I tried like 0.2 at most, this is all set up. If I go back into my object mode, oops, and adjust this. Now it's not moving as much. Its neighbors are, so we'll probably have to bring those back down. But yeah, you can see especially in here, right? Like I'm not getting a lot of movement. And something that I've done before, right, but I'll show again, is to set keyframes just to help us see what's going on. So we'll hit S, scrub forward in time, move this up and set another keyframe with S so I can see what's distorting, how to fix things. So I can see that this edge in here, right, if I right click and go to vertex mode, this edge in here is moving, more than the ring around it. So I'll shift click the vertex around it again to grab the ring. And I'm just going to zero this out, right? I don't want LTI to have anything on this. Zero. Also scrap the RTI influence as well. So now it's just between the jaw and the neck, mostly the neck. Go back to object mode. I'm getting a lot better deformation. So I'll continue to work my way inward, right? Go back to vertex selection mode and see what else is moving. Maybe this is a little too much in here. I'll grab the vertex ring, drop the LTI influence to maybe 0.3. Scrub through. I'm liking that a lot more. And even maybe this outside ring is still just doing a little too much, so I might just get rid of this one entirely as well. Oops. Let it be worked on by everything else. Yeah, and that's a little bit better. So I'll repeat that process for the other rings. Probably increasing the value as I go in, right? So if it was 0.2 or 0.25, maybe I'll make this 0.3. Cool, cool, cool. Go ahead and hide my LTIs now because they're starting to get in the way. So we can see like this in here. We're getting some strange movements. So I can fix that. .35. And maybe if I want 0.4 to be the only maximum, I'll grab back here, right? And then grow my selection forward, just so I can grab that next ring. And maybe set the LTI influence to 0.4 at most. Go back to object mode. I'm getting some pretty good deformations when the eyeball moves. So fortunately, we don't have to do this for the other side, right? That's where we can select the mesh, go up to skin, mirror skin weights. So now we'll get very similar deformations here on this eye. Just like over here. And I still might refine that a little bit more, right? But that's the basic idea of how you do it. So I deleted my keyframes. I have this skinned up sort of how I'd like it to be. I'll go over the jaw next with you, and then I'll probably do like a little, like time lapse of me going through and actually fixing the weights because you understand all the concepts. And if I just sat here and painted weights in real time forever, you'd be very bored. I'd be very bored. So we'd probably speed through a little bit. So I'm gonna hit S on my jaw. Scrub forward in time. Pull it down. So this is obviously not the deformation that we want. Hit S again. I even had auto keys on, so that probably helped me. But let's go ahead and start fixing the weights. So pulling this down right, we don't want anything above the upper lips, right, to start to deform. So we can go about this in a couple of different ways, right? We could grab our vertices and start to grab them one by one, maybe even turn on object symmetry, right? It's one way we could go about that and start zeroing it out through the component editor. You could also go back into object mode and instead grab your paint weights tool. Double click it to bring it up. I'm going to find my jaw. So that's jaw 1. Jaw 2 probably has maybe some reference or some weight on the tip. But just for reference, right, that bone will rotate back around where we actually place the jaw. So it's okay for a lot of this weight to be on jaw 1. That said, I do want to replace maybe with 0. So change my brush to replace and dump the value to 0 to instead just remove everything here that I don't want from the jaw. Start just carving that up and away. And keep in mind, right, like this isn't going to be perfectly black. But if it's blue, that means it's basically a non-zero value. And if I use my toggle off my color ramp, right, like it's obviously just kind of black here. So again, I'm only working on the left side of my face. So a lot of this is kind of moving a little bit. Maybe I'll smooth around in here. And I do maybe want there to be actual weights back here, so I might add a little bit of value. Go back in here, right along the jaw, where it actually makes sense for it to bend. Maybe even just a little bit up to the lips, right? So very, very subtle. But as I'm scrubbing forward, my bottom lip is still just not hanging. And while that may be a silly face, right, and some people can make that, that's not what we're looking for in terms of our rigging. So I might scrub forward to a point in time where I can start grabbing these vertices, start to reduce their weight to nil on the jaw. Go back to my component editor. See, I have jaw, and I really want them just to be bound to the neck and the head. So I'll zero out all of the different jaw influences, and now this will pop back up into place. So this is a great place for me to show you that last little tactic that we used in terms of copying and pasting weights from neighboring vertices. So, we can see obviously that there's almost like a cleft lip thing going on here, and that this should be, up in space with its friends. And we can do that, right, with the component editor as well. So if there's just some vertices that are misbehaving and you can't get in here with painting, you can instead just copy and paste those weights, just using Control-C and Control-V, right? So I'll select the vertex that's misbehaving first, go over here to the smooth skins, right? You can see that this says this is up to jaw 1, which is not what we want. But do note, this is vertex 45. So I'll shift select its neighbor up here, vertex 102, and what I'll instead do is copy those weights, from vertex 102, grab my next, since this is 100%, hit Control-V, and Control-V into vertex 45. And now this is popped back up into place. So you can use this tactic, right, to get certain vertices to behave like their neighbors. So if you're seeing some weirdness, right, like especially, if you're like having some weirdness in the fingers where a single vertex is pulling away, aside from just zeroing it out and adjusting the weights, you can also copy and paste those weights between it and a neighboring vertex. I would just say be, cognizant of the order that you're grabbing things in. So like if maybe the weights up here are correct, and I want to select these, I just want to make sure that I note these vertex numbers first. I'll probably turn off symmetry because this is a little bit of a gap. I'll just select this one. So again, that's vertex 3658. I'd come down here and shift select 3663 instead and begin to copy over some of those influences. And now, those will come back into place. And of course, work on one half of the face because we can go up to skin and mirror skin weights and how things are behaving. And of course, if it doesn't seem like that really worked, I would go back to the 0 position, and I might actually undo because that might have messed me up a little bit. I go back to the 0 position, then mirror your skin weights. So if you're having issues with things not quite behaving like they should, do double check and make sure that you're on frame 0 and that there aren't any keyframes getting in the way. So between copying the weight of neighboring vertices, right, manually keying them in the component editor to remove influences that we don't like, using paint weights, and then even using, if the situation calls for it, grabbing a bone, selecting the mesh, and going up to skin, edit influences, and add influence. Between all of that, you should have enough tools to get your weights all painted up on your girl. So I will shut up and I will time lapse this while I actually work on fixing the weights. I'll start with the face and then I'll work down for the rest of the body to get some deformations that I actually like. So again, I'll go really fast here. So if you really want to pause or reduce the playback speed, you can, but I'm just doing what we've done in class and I'm practicing what we've learned to just get these weights fixed up. So that said, let's go ahead and speed forward. So quick break here is that something that I came across and I've seen happen in class a couple times is that mirror skin weights isn't going across correctly. You can again use symmetry to grab the vertices that are misbehaving, right? So this one is obviously stuck beneath this face. So I switched to wireframe very briefly, and grab the offending vertex. And when I go back, I can see that on the other side there is this other vertex that actually has weights that are correct. So I might just use that copying tool to get them back into place. So I'd go back into the component editor, right? And instead of guessing, I'll just deselect, go back into leave symmetry first. So 3669, nice, is what I want to grab. So let's go ahead and get those copied over. If it's not quite doing what it should, you might have to deselect and leave symmetry. Grab it. Like this is obviously jaw 1. Back here. Let's go ahead and down here. Grab that. Obviously, we can't move this back up into place. So use tactics like that to get things copied over. Actually, something I did want to show is that this is getting a little jank in here, right? So I might need to either copy over the skin weights from the other side, right? So I'd go through looking at this with symmetry. I can see that this is part of the lip. So let me see here. Select the 4th one over. I could select this, grab the weight that I'd like. Select the other one, maybe look at the weight difference, see if anything's going on there. Or even then, right, I might start copying the neighbors where I'll grab this one, then shift select. So copy over the weights from 1064 onto 988 onto 1064, not the other way around. So go ahead and undo that real quick. I can copy the neck value. You can shift select, paste the neck value. And now this is looking a little bit better. So again, if there's weirdness, you may not even need to do this on certain frames or with this out rotated. So just noodle between rotating the correct angle and seeing what happens. So that's all I had for this. I'm going to keep speeding through. All right, so that's about it from me. I think that'll be a wrap. I've got a lot of deformations, a lot closer to how I'd like, especially in the ankle, the arms, wrist a little bit, but definitely in the spine and the torso area needed some work. And then I finally, of course, took a look up here and I've got pretty decent work with my jaw. So don't forget to delete your keyframes, right? Go ahead and save this out once you're done with it for your assignment. Do keep probably a copy of the weighted version. Once we start building controls and more things in here, it might be helpful to have a checkpoint. But that's what weights will look like. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you next time.